Some messages don't break your heart all at once. They arrive quietly, dressed like a joke, and then spend the rest of your life proving they weren't. My name is Cole Walker. I'm 46 years old, born and raised in Texas, and for most of my adult life, I believed stability was something you built one ordinary day at a time. I owned a small industrial equipment company outside Fort Worth. Nothing flashy. Steel buildings, forklifts, contracts, long hours, and the kind of work that leaves dust on your boots even after a shower. My wife, Rebecca, used to joke that she could always tell when I got home because the whole house smelled faintly like machine oil and black coffee. We'd been married for 17 years, long enough to think we knew each other's rhythms, long enough to believe surprises belonged to younger people. The truth is, most disasters don't announce themselves. They don't kick down the front door. They slip in quietly through a text message while you're standing in line waiting for a turkey sandwich at a gas station outside Wichita Falls. That's exactly where I was when my phone buzzed that Thursday afternoon. I remember the fluorescent lights overhead. I remember the hum of the drink cooler. I remember a country song playing somewhere near the cash register. Ordinary details. The kind your brain holds on to when it knows something important is about to happen. I glanced down at the screen, expecting something routine. Maybe a grocery reminder. Maybe a question about dinner. Instead, I saw Rebecca's name followed by a message that made me read it twice. Going on a solo trip with my first love. Don't be jealous. There was a smiling emoji at the end. A playful one. Like she expected me to laugh. For a second, I actually did. Not because it was funny. Because my brain couldn't find another reaction fast enough. I stared at the message while the cashier called the next customer. Solo trip with my first love. It sounded ridiculous. Like the setup to a joke that forgot its punchline. I typed 3 words. What are you talking about? Before I could hit send, another notification appeared. This time it was a photo. Rebecca standing inside an airport terminal. Rolling suitcase beside her. Sunglasses pushed into her blonde hair. Smiling directly at the camera. The bright afternoon light reflected off the giant windows behind her. She looked happy. Excited, even. My thumb hovered over the screen. Something felt off. I couldn't explain it. Not yet. Just a small pressure in my chest. The kind that appears before a storm reaches the horizon. Then my phone buzzed again. Different notification. Different app. American First National Bank. Transaction alert. I frowned. The charge amount sat there in bold numbers. $4,873.62. I stared at it for several seconds. Merchant name. Seaside Cove Luxury Resort. Key West, Florida. My stomach tightened. Rebecca and I shared that account. We always had. We talked about major expenses. We planned vacations together. We definitely didn't spend nearly $5,000 on surprise resort bookings. I opened the transaction details. Villa reservation. 7 nights. Premium oceanfront package. The fluorescent lights above me suddenly felt too bright. The sounds inside the store seemed farther away. Maybe there was an explanation. That's what people tell themselves when they don't want to look directly at reality. Maybe it was a work retreat. Maybe she forgot to mention it. Maybe the message was exactly what it looked like. I paid for my sandwich, walked outside, and stood beside my truck under the hot Texas sun. The heat rolled off the pavement in waves. Somewhere across the parking lot, an 18-wheeler idled near the diesel pumps. I looked at the photo again. Rebecca smiling at the airport. Then I looked at the resort charge. Then back at the text. Going on a solo trip with my first love. Don't be jealous. Funny thing about trust. It doesn't disappear in one moment. It cracks. Quietly. Almost politely. And standing there beside my F-250 with the afternoon sun burning through the windshield, I felt the first crack open beneath my feet. What I didn't know yet was that the message wasn't the worst part. The worst part was already hidden inside that photograph. And Rebecca had just handed it to me herself. The drive back to Fort Worth should have taken a little over 2 hours. I barely remember any of it. The highway stretched ahead in long ribbons of concrete, while my mind kept replaying the same 3 things over and over. The text message. The airport photo. The resort charge. Individually, each one could have been explained away. Together, they felt like pieces of a puzzle I did not want to solve. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the late afternoon sun was hanging low over the neighborhood. Everything looked normal. The trimmed lawns. The flag across the street. The sound of a lawn mower somewhere in the distance. That was the strange thing about life. Sometimes the world refused to change even when yours already had. I sat in my truck for a minute before going inside. Rebecca had left that morning. The house was empty. Quiet. The kind of quiet that suddenly feels different when you know someone is not coming home that night. I walked into the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. Then I looked at my phone again. There was finally a reply. Relax. Tyler and I have not seen each other in years. This is just closure. You know I would never do anything to hurt you. I stared at the message. Closure. It was a word people used when they wanted something to sound mature. Responsible. Harmless. I read it twice more before setting the phone down. Then something caught my attention. The airport photo. I opened it again and zoomed in. Rebecca stood in the center of the frame smiling. Behind her, sunlight reflected off the massive terminal windows. Travelers moved through the background carrying bags and coffee cups. At first glance, nothing unusual. But when I zoomed in further, I noticed a reflection in the glass panel beside her. It was faint, easy to miss. A man stood several feet behind her. Baseball cap, navy polo shirt, dark travel bag over one shoulder. My pulse slowed. Not because I was calm, because something inside me was focusing. The reflection was distorted, but not enough. I knew that face. Tyler Brooks. I had met him exactly twice. Once at a college reunion years ago. Once at a charity event Rebecca insisted we attend. He was the kind of man people described as charming. Easy smile. Confident voice. The sort of person who never seemed uncomfortable in any room. Rebecca always claimed they stayed friendly after their breakup. Nothing more. Looking at that reflection, I realized something important. She never mentioned he would be traveling with her. Not once. My phone buzzed again. Another message from Rebecca. Flight delayed. Finally boarding. Talk later tonight. Love you. Love you. The words landed differently than they used to. I looked back at the photo. Tyler was standing close enough to be captured in the reflection. Close enough to be traveling with her. Yet somehow absent from every explanation she had given. The first lie is rarely the biggest one. It is usually the smallest, the easiest, the one that tests whether you will notice. I walked into my home office and opened my laptop. I told myself I was only looking for reassurance, only trying to confirm there was a reasonable explanation. Looking back now, I think part of me already knew what I was going to find. Rebecca and I shared access to several travel reward accounts, credit cards, airline programs, hotel memberships. Normal married couple stuff accumulated over years. I logged into one of the airline accounts connected to our household profile. A few clicks later, her reservation appeared. Fort Worth to Key West. 7 days. First class upgrade. Then I noticed another reservation purchased within minutes of hers. Same departure time. Same destination. Same return date. Different account holder. Tyler Brooks. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Outside, the evening light was fading beyond the window. The house felt colder than it had an hour earlier. Not because I had discovered an affair. Not because I had proof of betrayal. I did not have either of those things yet. What I had was something almost worse. Evidence that Rebecca was carefully choosing which parts of the truth I was allowed to see. And for the first time in 17 years of marriage, I found myself wondering how many other truths had been hidden just outside the frame. That night, I barely slept. Not because I was angry. Anger is loud. This was something quieter. Something colder. I sat in my home office long after midnight, staring at the glow of a monitor while the rest of the house sat in darkness around me. Every room carried traces of 17 years together. Family photos. Vacation souvenirs. The coffee mug Rebecca always used on Sunday mornings. Ordinary things. The kind that suddenly feel like evidence when trust begins to crack. Around 1 in the morning, my phone lit up. A text from Rebecca. Landed safely. The resort is beautiful. You would love it here. I read the message twice before setting the phone face down. There was a time when those words would have made me smile. Now they felt like they belonged to someone else. Looking back, I should have paid more attention years ago. The truth rarely appears all at once. It leaves footprints. Small ones. Easy ones to ignore. Rebecca met Tyler in college long before she met me. I knew the basic story. Everyone did. Young love. Wrong timing. Different life goals. They broke up after graduation and supposedly went their separate ways. That was always the version I heard. Clean. Simple. Finished. But over the years his name never completely disappeared. Every once in a while it surfaced in conversation. Usually when Rebecca was feeling nostalgic. We would be driving somewhere or sitting on the back patio after dinner, and she would suddenly mention him. Tyler used to love this restaurant. Tyler always wanted to visit that city. Tyler was terrible at directions. Small comments. Harmless comments. At least that is what I told myself. Married people talk about their past sometimes. It never seemed important. Then I started remembering details I had forgotten. 3 years ago, we attended a charity fundraiser downtown. Rebecca spent nearly 20 minutes talking with someone across the ballroom. When she came back to our table, her cheeks were flushed, and she smiled more than usual. I asked who she had been speaking with. Tyler, she said. Just catching up. Nothing more. Another time, she received a Christmas card from an out-of-state address. I noticed his signature at the bottom. She laughed and tossed it onto the counter like it meant nothing. There were dozens of moments like that. None of them serious enough to start an argument. None of them large enough to justify suspicion. But sitting alone in my office that night, they began lining up in my memory like pieces of a trail I had never followed. Around 2 in the morning, I got up and walked into the garage. I was not looking for anything specific. Sometimes movement feels easier than thinking. The garage smelled like sawdust, motor oil, and old cardboard boxes. Years of accumulated life stacked against the walls. Holiday decorations, camping gear, tools, forgotten electronics. I started organizing shelves simply to keep my hands busy. That was when I noticed a dusty plastic storage bin tucked behind an old workbench. Inside were several outdated devices we had not used in years. Old phones, chargers, cables, and an aging tablet wrapped in a faded protective case. I recognized it immediately. Rebecca used it years ago before upgrading to newer devices. I almost put it back. Then I hesitated. The screen was cracked along one corner. The charging cable was still inside the case. For reasons I could not explain, I plugged it in. The battery icon appeared a few moments later. Then the device slowly powered on. I expected a password screen. Instead, it opened directly to the home page. The tablet had apparently never been reset. I sat down on a stool and stared at the display. Family photos filled the screen. Vacation pictures, birthday dinners, summer barbecues. A digital scrapbook of a life that suddenly felt less certain than it had 24 hours earlier. Then I noticed something else. A messaging application tucked inside an old folder. The notification badge was empty. No alerts. No recent activity visible from the home screen. Yet something about it made me pause. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was coincidence. Whatever the reason, I opened it. And as the messages began loading onto the screen, a feeling settled deep in my chest. The same feeling I had standing beside my truck outside that gas station. The sense that I was about to discover something that had never truly ended, only disappeared from view. The messages stretched back far longer than I expected. Not months, not even a couple of years. The earliest conversation I could find was nearly 8 years old. I sat there in the garage staring at the screen while the tablet's faint glow reflected off stacks of storage boxes around me. At first, the exchanges looked harmless. Birthday wishes, holiday greetings, updates about jobs and cities and mutual friends. The kind of conversations two people might have after staying loosely connected over time. That was what I wanted to believe. Then I kept scrolling. Patterns began appearing. The messages never completely stopped. Weeks would pass, sometimes a month. Then another conversation would start. Another check-in, another memory, another private joke that made no sense to anyone outside the conversation. What bothered me was not any single message. It was the consistency. Tyler was there through almost every season of Rebecca's life. Promotions, vacations, family events, major decisions, things she had shared with him while sitting across from me at the dinner table pretending those moments belonged only to us. Around 3 in the morning, I finally stopped reading and walked back into the house. The silence felt heavier now. I poured myself coffee, even though I knew sleep was no longer an option. Outside, the neighborhood was dark except for a few porch lights glowing in the distance. Somewhere down the street, a dog barked once, and then everything went quiet again. I returned to the tablet and continued digging. What I discovered next unsettled me more than the messages themselves. Photographs. Not inappropriate. Not dramatic. Just pictures exchanged over years. Conference centers. Airports. Restaurants. Tourist attractions. Images taken in places Rebecca had supposedly visited for work. Looking at them individually, they meant very little. Looking at them together told a different story. I opened my laptop and started comparing dates. One conference in Phoenix 4 years earlier. Tyler had been there. A business seminar in Denver. Tyler appeared in photos taken that same week. A leadership workshop in Charleston. Again, the timelines overlapped. Coincidence is possible once, maybe twice. But after the fourth or fifth example, coincidence begins looking a lot like planning. My chest tightened. Not from rage. From disappointment. The kind that settles slowly into your bones. The kind that changes how memories feel when you revisit them. I remembered helping Rebecca pack for those trips. Driving her to airports. Picking her up when she returned. Listening to stories about keynote speakers and networking events and delayed flights. Looking back, I realized something painful. Many of the details had probably been true. That was what made it harder. The strongest lies often contain large pieces of truth. By sunrise, I had created a timeline across my desk. Notes, dates, flight confirmations, hotel records I could access through shared reward accounts. The pattern was impossible to ignore now. At least 4 separate trips over the last 6 years placed Rebecca and Tyler in the same city at the same time. Maybe more. I simply had not finished checking yet. My phone vibrated against the desk. A new message from Rebecca. Good morning. The ocean view is incredible. You would love the sunrise here. I stared at the screen. There was even a photo attached. Palm trees. Blue water. A white balcony overlooking the beach. Everything looked peaceful, beautiful, normal. Yet all I could see was the timeline spread across my desk. The years. The messages. The connections that never seemed to break. For a moment, I almost replied. I almost asked the question sitting at the center of everything. How long has this really been going on? Instead, I locked the phone and set it aside. Because deep down, I already knew something important. The answer would not come from asking. The answer would come from evidence. And for the first time in my life, I stopped looking for explanations and started looking for facts. By the afternoon of the second day, something inside me had changed. Not dramatically. Not in the way movies like to portray it. There was no speech in the mirror. No grand realization. Just a quiet shift. The kind that happens when denial finally runs out of places to hide. I spent the morning at the office pretending life was normal. Forklifts moved across the warehouse floor. Delivery trucks arrived on schedule. Purchase orders needed approval. Employees stopped by my office with routine questions. To everyone else, it was an ordinary Friday. To me, it felt like standing in the middle of a house, while slowly realizing the foundation had cracks you never noticed before. Around lunchtime, my phone lit up again. Another message from Rebecca. She sent a picture of a beachside restaurant overlooking the water. Beautiful weather. Wish you were here. I stared at the screen for several seconds before locking the phone and placing it face down on my desk. The strange thing was not that she was texting me. It was that she was texting me exactly the way she always had. Casual, comfortable, familiar, as if nothing had changed. As if the timeline spread across my desk at home did not exist. As if Tyler Brooks was not sharing the same destination, the same travel dates, and the same luxury resort. Looking back, that was the moment I stopped searching for reassurance. Reassurance requires trust. Facts require discipline. And discipline was something I understood. I built my business through discipline. Long hours. Consistent decisions. Quiet persistence. Emotional reactions rarely solve complicated problems. Evidence does. That evening, instead of driving straight home, I parked outside a law office near downtown Fort Worth. The building sat between a financial planning firm and a small insurance agency. Nothing impressive from the outside. Just brick walls, tinted windows, and a brass directory beside the entrance. I sat in my truck for nearly 10 minutes before going inside. Not because I was uncertain, because crossing certain doors changes things. Once you walk through them, you cannot pretend you never considered what comes next. The attorney I met with was named Daniel Mercer. Mid-50s. Calm voice. No dramatic promises. Exactly the type of person I needed. He listened carefully while I explained the situation. The messages. The travel records. The years of contact. When I finished, he folded his hands across the desk and looked at me for several seconds. Then he asked a simple question. Do you want assumptions or facts? I remember that question because it sounded exactly like something I would have asked one of my project managers. Facts, I said. He nodded. Good answer. Then he spent the next hour explaining documentation, financial records, property protection, and legal preparation. No accusations. No emotional speeches. Just process. By the time I left his office, I had a checklist. Secure copies of financial statements. Preserve communication records. Review shared accounts. Document everything. Most importantly, remain calm. Driving home that night, the Texas sky glowed orange along the horizon. The sun was setting behind miles of open highway. I should have felt devastated. Instead, I felt focused. Not because the situation hurt less, because uncertainty hurts more than action. At home, I spent hours organizing records, business accounts, investment statements, property documents, insurance policies, years of financial history, everything carefully copied and stored. Then I opened a separate notebook and began creating a timeline. Dates, trips, messages, transactions, patterns. One page became three became six. Somewhere after midnight, I looked around the quiet house and realized something important. For 17 years, I had built my future around Rebecca. Every major decision, every long-term plan, every vision of retirement and family and growing old together. But for the first time since receiving that message at the gas station, another possibility entered my mind. A future that did not include her. The thought should have frightened me. Instead, it felt strangely clear. My phone buzzed once more before I went to bed. Another message from Rebecca. Sunset was incredible tonight. Talk tomorrow. Love you. I looked at those words for a long time. Then I set the phone on the nightstand and turned off the lamp. Because while Rebecca was watching sunsets in Key West, I was quietly preparing for a reality she did not even know existed yet. The call came on the fourth day of the trip. I was standing in the warehouse reviewing a shipment schedule when my phone vibrated in my pocket. The number was unfamiliar. Florida area code. Normally, I would have ignored it. Lately, however, unfamiliar things had a habit of becoming important. I stepped into my office and answered. A polite female voice greeted me. She sounded professional, slightly nervous, the way customer service employees sound when they know a conversation is not going according to plan. Mr. Walker? This is Amanda from Seaside Cove Luxury Resort. I apologize for bothering you. We are having an issue processing a transaction associated with your account. For a second, I said nothing. The room suddenly felt very quiet. Outside my office window, forklifts continued moving across the yard, completely unaware that my life had narrowed to a single phone call. I asked what kind of issue. Amanda explained that a premium dining package had been charged to the payment method on file, but an authorization verification was required because the amount exceeded a preset limit. She began reading transaction details, dates, reservation numbers, package descriptions. I listened carefully without interrupting. Then she mentioned something that made my stomach tighten. The villa reservation. Singular. Not reservations. One villa. One booking. One account. I leaned back slowly in my chair. Maybe she noticed the silence because her voice became cautious. Mr. Walker, are you still there? Yes, I said. I am listening. She continued explaining the authorization process. Most of it barely registered. My attention was fixed on one detail. The luxury villa reserved for 2 guests under a single booking package. The same package attached to the charge that had appeared on my account. I thanked her and ended the call professionally. Then I sat motionless for nearly a minute staring at the dark computer monitor on my desk. The call had not proven everything. It had not revealed dramatic secrets. It had not provided a confession. What it did provide was something more valuable. Confirmation. For days I had been assembling pieces. Messages. Timelines. Travel records. Shared destinations. Patterns. Now another piece had quietly locked into place. I opened my notebook and added new information to the growing timeline. The page was beginning to look less like notes and more like an investigation. Looking back, I think that was the moment hope finally disappeared. Not because I learned something shocking. Because I stopped expecting an innocent explanation. Hope survives uncertainty. Facts tend to remove it. Around sunset, my phone buzzed again. Rebecca. The familiar name appeared on the screen as though nothing in the world had changed. We spent the afternoon sailing. You would have loved it. She attached a picture of the ocean. Blue water stretched all the way to the horizon beneath a sky painted gold by the setting sun. It was beautiful. I stared at the image longer than I expected. 17 years of marriage teaches you things about a person. The angle she preferred when taking photos. The smile she used for social media. The difference between genuine excitement and practiced happiness. Looking at that picture, I realized something unsettling. She looked completely comfortable. Not nervous. Not conflicted. Comfortable. I typed a short reply. Glad you are having a good trip. A few seconds later, she responded with a heart emoji and a message telling me she would call later that evening. She never did. Around midnight, another notification arrived instead. Sorry. Long day. Exhausted. Talk tomorrow. I placed the phone on the nightstand and turned off the lamp. The room fell into darkness. For several minutes, I listened to the hum of the ceiling fan turning slowly overhead. For days earlier, I had been trying to save my assumptions. Now I was protecting facts. There is a difference. Assumptions ask questions. Facts make plans. And lying awake in the dark, I realized I was no longer preparing for a conversation. I was preparing for a future Rebecca still believed she controlled. Rebecca came home on a Sunday afternoon. I knew the exact moment she pulled into the driveway because I was standing in the kitchen looking through financial statements when the familiar sound of her SUV echoed through the garage. For a few seconds, I simply stood there listening. 7 days earlier, that sound would have meant comfort. Routine. Home. Now it felt like the beginning of something else. The garage door rolled shut. A car door opened. Then footsteps. Calm. Unhurried. Confident. The front door swung open and Rebecca stepped inside, carrying a designer travel bag and wearing the same relaxed smile she had used in every photo she sent during the trip. Her skin carried the faint glow of someone who had spent a week in warm weather. Sunglasses rested on top of her head. She looked happy, almost refreshed. For a brief moment, she reminded me of the woman I married 17 years ago. Then reality returned. Hey, stranger, she said with a laugh. Miss me? I smiled politely. Welcome home. She walked over and kissed my cheek before setting her bags near the staircase. The gesture felt automatic. Practiced. Like muscle memory rather than emotion. You would not believe how beautiful it was, she said. The weather was perfect every day. I nodded. Looks like you had a good time. I really did. She looked around the kitchen. Everything okay here? Everything is fine. The answer was true. At least partly. Something interesting happens when a person expects conflict and receives calm instead. You can almost see them become uncertain. Not immediately. Just little signs. Tiny pauses. Slight changes in expression. Rebecca seemed to be studying me now. Not obviously. Just enough to notice. She opened the refrigerator, grabbed a bottle of water, and leaned against the counter. You are being awfully quiet. Long week, I said. Work has been busy. That explanation seemed to satisfy her for the moment. The rest of the afternoon unfolded with strange normality. She unpacked, told stories about restaurants and sunsets and tourist attractions, showed me photographs of beaches and boats and waterfront cafes. I listened carefully. Occasionally, I asked a question. Occasionally, she laughed. From the outside, we probably looked like any married couple reconnecting after a trip. Inside, however, everything felt different. Every story contained missing pieces. Every smile carried a shadow I could not ignore. Around 6 o'clock, she came into my office carrying 2 glasses of wine. She handed one to me and sat across from my desk. Can I ask you something? She said. Sure. She hesitated before smiling. You are not actually jealous about this trip, are you? There it was. Not an accusation. Not a confession. A test. A simple question disguised as reassurance. I looked at her for several seconds before answering. The silence seemed to make her slightly uncomfortable. Finally, I smiled. Should I be? She laughed softly. No, of course not. Then she looked away for the briefest moment. It was tiny, barely noticeable. But after a week of studying timelines and messages and patterns, I noticed everything. Good, she said. I would hate for you to think something ridiculous. Ridiculous. The word stayed with me long after the conversation ended. That night we ate dinner together. We talked about work, the neighborhood, upcoming plans, surface-level things. Rebecca seemed increasingly relaxed as the evening went on. I think she believed the danger had passed. I think she believed whatever concerns I might have had were gone now. Looking back, that was the moment I understood something important. Rebecca was still operating inside the version of reality she had created. The version where I only knew what she chose to tell me. The version where the messages stayed hidden. The timelines stayed buried. The facts remained invisible. What she did not realize was that version had already disappeared. And while she slept peacefully upstairs that night, convinced she had returned to the same marriage she left behind, I sat alone in my office reviewing one final folder and preparing for what came next. 3 days later, Rebecca's birthday arrived. Every year we hosted a small gathering at the house. Family, close friends, a few neighbors, nothing extravagant. The kind of evening built around food, conversation, and familiar faces. Rebecca spent the entire week preparing. She ordered decorations, coordinated catering, and sent reminders to everyone attending. Watching her move through those routines felt surreal. She laughed easily, made plans, talked about the future. Every time she did, I found myself wondering how many futures she believed were still available. By 6 o'clock, the house was full. Music drifted through the living room. Glasses clinked. Conversations overlapped. Her sister stood near the kitchen island telling stories from work. A neighbor discussed football season with one of my friends. Rebecca moved from group to group, accepting hugs and birthday wishes. From the outside, it looked like a perfect evening. That was the strange thing about appearances. They often survive long after reality has changed. Around 7:30, Rebecca walked over and slipped her arm through mine. "Thank you for helping put this together," she said softly. "It means a lot." I smiled. Of course. She looked genuinely happy. Maybe that was what made the moment harder. Not because I wanted revenge. I did not. Not because I wanted humiliation. I did not. What hurt was realizing how comfortably someone can stand inside a version of reality built on omissions. At 8 o'clock, I stepped into my office and returned carrying a simple black folder. Nothing dramatic. No speeches prepared. No emotional outburst waiting beneath the surface. Just facts. Quietly organized facts. Rebecca noticed the folder immediately. "What is that?" she asked with a laugh. "Something I need to share." A few conversations nearby faded as people turned toward us. Not because anyone expected conflict. Because humans naturally pay attention when a person's tone changes. I placed the folder on the dining table and opened it. Rebecca's smile weakened slightly. Then I connected my laptop to the television mounted above the fireplace. The screen illuminated the room with soft blue light. Nobody spoke. I began with the simplest piece. Flight records. Matching travel dates. Matching destinations. Then hotel reservations. Shared locations. Timelines. Nothing exaggerated. Nothing speculative. Every document displayed exactly what it was. A document. A date. A fact. Rebecca's expression changed slowly. First confusion. Then concern. Then recognition. Her sister looked from the screen back to Rebecca. A neighbor shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Someone quietly set down a glass. The room had become completely silent. Next came the messages. Not private details. Not anything inappropriate. Just enough to establish a pattern stretching across years. Conversations that never ended. Contact that never disappeared. Histories that contradicted the version of events I had been given. Rebecca's face lost color. "Cole," she said quietly. "Can we talk about this privately?" I looked at her for a moment. Then I answered calmly. "We have had years to talk privately." Nobody moved. Nobody interrupted. The silence felt heavier than any argument could have. Finally, I placed the last item on the table. A packet prepared by Daniel Mercer. Legal paperwork. Organized. Complete. Signed. Not emotional. Not reactive. Prepared carefully over days of documentation and consideration. Rebecca stared at it as though it belonged to someone else's life. "You already did this?" she whispered. I nodded. The question seemed to answer itself. For the first time since returning from Florida, she looked genuinely uncertain. Not because she had been confronted, because she had been left behind. While she believed she was managing information, controlling narratives, and protecting assumptions, reality had continued moving forward without her. One decision at a time. One document at a time. One fact at a time. And standing there surrounded by family, friends, and the life we spent 17 years building together, she finally understood something I had realized days earlier. The conversation was no longer about what happened. The conversation was about what came next. 6 months later, the house felt different. Not emptier, just quieter. There is a difference. Empty feels like something is missing. Quiet feels like something has finally stopped fighting for space. The divorce process moved forward exactly the way Daniel Mercer predicted it would. Slowly, methodically, one document after another, one decision after another. No dramatic courtroom scenes. No last-minute surprises. Just reality catching up to choices that had already been made. Rebecca moved into a condominium across town. I stayed in the house for a while before eventually purchasing a smaller place closer to the office. Nothing extravagant. A simple property with a wide front porch and enough land behind it to watch the Texas sunset without another rooftop blocking the view. The first few weeks were strange. 17 years of habits do not disappear overnight. Sometimes I would reach for a second coffee mug before remembering there was no reason to. Sometimes I would hear a song in a grocery store and find myself thinking about a vacation we took years earlier. Memories do not vanish when trust does. They simply change shape. What surprised me most was not the sadness. It was the clarity. For years I had confused stability with certainty. I believed that because something had lasted a long time, it was guaranteed to continue. Life does not work that way. Good relationships require honesty. Not perfection, not constant happiness, just honesty. Without it, even the strongest foundation eventually begins to shift. A few months after everything ended, I heard through mutual friends that Rebecca was struggling. Not financially, not professionally, emotionally. Apparently, reality had unfolded differently than she expected. I never asked for details. I never felt the need to. Some chapters do not require additional pages. One evening in late October, I was sitting on my porch watching the sun sink below the horizon when my phone buzzed. The sky was painted in shades of orange and gold. A cool breeze moved through the trees. It was the kind of evening that reminds you life keeps moving forward whether you are ready or not. I glanced at the screen. Rebecca, the first message in almost 3 months. For several seconds, I simply looked at her name. Then I opened it. The message contained only one sentence. I never thought you would actually leave. That was all. No explanation. No argument. No request. Just one sentence. I read it twice. Then a third time. Years earlier, those words would have broken my heart. In that moment, however, they felt different. Sad. Honest. Final. Because the truth was simple. I had not left because of one trip, or one message, or one person. I left because trust cannot survive indefinitely when honesty disappears. I set the phone down and looked back toward the sunset. For the first time in a very long while, I felt completely at peace. Not happy because someone else was unhappy. Not satisfied because I had won. Life is not a competition. I felt peaceful because I no longer carried questions. The facts had already answered them. I never replied to the message. Not out of anger. Not out of cruelty. Some conversations end long before the final words are spoken. As darkness settled across the horizon, I realized the most painful lesson in this entire experience was also the simplest. People often believe they have more time than they actually do. More time to tell the truth. More time to repair trust. More time to choose differently. Then one day they discover the person waiting for those choices has already moved on. And that brings me to a question for you. After hearing this story, what would you have done in my position? Would you have confronted everything immediately, or would you have followed the facts the way I did? Let me know your thoughts in the comments because I would genuinely like to hear them. And if stories about resilience, difficult choices, and finding strength through truth resonate with you, consider subscribing so you do not miss the next journey. Sometimes the hardest endings teach us the most important lessons about what truly matters.